Hi guys, it's the 305 Wine Guy coming at you with my trusty sidekick, Dusky, who does not want to be on camera right now, from downtown Miami. And I'm here today to talk to you, to give you an introduction on how to properly taste wine. So first and foremost, I want to mention that wine tasting is incredibly subjective, right? You are drinking one of the most subjective drinks in the world, and it is your taste only. You're the only one that can perceive it. So you should never feel anxious or nervous about tasting wine. And if anyone ever gives you any kind of garbage or mouth about your taste and what you perceive, they're just being a dick, okay? So just know that going into it. Never feel anxious. Say what you perceive and learn how to do it, of course. And that's why we're here. So when it comes to tasting wine, the first thing that you're going to want to do is look at the color. And as I mentioned, you want to have something white as a background to look at the color to help make sure that you're getting a better view of the color. I can use my floors as well here because they're white, so it doesn't really matter where you are as long as you have something white and the environment is well lit. Right now it's daytime in downtown Miami and super sunny, so we're good there. Color, why is it important? Color can tell you a few things about wine. Color can tell you the age of the wine. Red wines will lose color as they age. White wines will gain color. Color can also give you an idea of what the grape is. So if you're ever in a blind tasting for whatever reason, or if you just you just want to impress someone, you can tell them, hey, I think that might be a Cabernet if it's really deep and dark, because Cabernets have thick skins and they impart more color. Okay, so let's look at the color of this wine. This here, I have a nice excuse to drink at 11:45 a.m. this morning. This is Notarpenaro. It is a Negro Amaro from southern Italy. Negro Amaro Salento is the region, and Negro Amaro is actually also the grape. It's not a very well-known grape, but this is a delicious wine, and it's in perfect form right now. So the first thing you're going to want to do is take a look at it like this. Bend the glass over so it spreads out in the glass, and then you're going to want to describe the color. For red wines, the typical colors you're looking for are ruby and purple. So is a wine ruby or is a wine purple? Pretty straightforward. We're going to keep it really simple here today. And then how intense is that color? So you want to take your two fingers and you want to put them behind the glass. And if you can't see your fingers, that's pretty deep intensity. If you can see them, but not very well, maybe you can see the edges, but you can't see the fingerprints, that's medium intensity. And then if you can see them pretty well in pretty good detail, that's very light intensity. For me, this one is ruby, and it's a medium intensity ruby because I can kind of see my fingers through it. Okay, so that's color, and now it's time to move on to smell. Aromas are the most subjective part of all of this because there's really, it's really what you perceive. There's not a whole lot of objectivity to it. I mean, there is some, I'll talk about it in a second, but for the most part, what do you smell? Just think of anything. You can even say, hey, I smell wine if you're just an amateur and starting out. It doesn't matter as long as you're trying. So you're going to want to first just kind of take your nose and just glide over the glass. And then you're going to want to swirl and do it again. And everyone's different. I've heard you're not supposed to dip your nose in there and really kind of get it too close because you can get actually nasal fatigue and your sense of smell can kind of go away if you keep on sniffing and sniffing and sniffing. So only try to do it a couple times and do that swirl to not only to aerate the wine and let it breathe, but also to let off the aromas because the wine comes up on the glass and obviously it gets closer to your nose that way. So for me, I smell some earthy smells and some dark fruit, and there's a bit of an age characteristic to this. And we'll talk in a second about what those mean. There are three types of main aromas. There are primary aromas. Those come from the fruit itself. Those are typically fruit aromas. They can also be earthy aromas. They can be kind of woodsy, floral aromas, citrus. You can get kind of crushed stone. So any of those aromas, if you detect those aromas, those are primary aromas. And then we're going to move on to secondary aromas. Secondary aromas are from the winemaking process itself. Typically, those are from the yeast cells, dead yeast cells that remain in the wine as it ages, and sometimes even in the bottle. Typically, it's in the barrel, and typically it's for white wine that they leave the yeast cells in there. And then also oak. Oak imparts both flavor, a little bit of flavor, but more so aromas. So those oaky aromas are going to be kind of like vanilla, cloves, baking spice, even like espresso you can get from oak. The yeasty aromas are going to be more like brioche or toast, or almost nutty aromas. Nutty you can also get from tertiary, which we'll talk about next. So those are the primary and secondary, and then tertiary, as I mentioned. Those come from aging. So this is a 2010. It's got a little bit of age on it. And tertiary aromas are going to be developed after the first 4 or 5 years of being in the barrel and bottle. So 4 or 5 years after the vintage date. Typically with white wines, you're going to get the oxidative notes you're going to get are more like candied fruits, nutty aromas as well, as I mentioned. And red wine, you'll get kind of like mushrooms. You'll get some more darker candied fruit as well. The fruit aromas kind of dry out, as they say, and they turn from, plum to like dried plum, or apricot to dried apricot. So those kind of like aged notes. Now we're going to get into actually tasting the wine, which is why we're all here, right? So first thing first with tasting the wine, you're going to want to chew on the wine, okay? So take a sip and chew it. Damn, that's good. What you're looking for here is to describe the structure of the wine. So what is the structure of the wine? Structure is made up of really 4 or sometimes 5 different components. For me, I'm looking at acidity, I'm looking at alcohol levels, I'm looking at tannins, whether there's a lack of tannins. I'm looking at to see if there's any sugar, and then finally I'm looking at body, whether it's dry or not. So how do you tell let's start with alcohol. How do you tell what alcohol percentage a wine is? Usually if a wine is higher in alcohol, we're talking 15% or above, you're gonna get a little bit of burn on the back of your tongue, towards the back of your palate, so you know it's higher in alcohol. This one, I didn't get much burn, and I know, knowing where it's from and the way it's made, I would probably guess around 13 or 14%, probably high 13%. Sugar, this is kind of a fun one. Seriously, stick your tongue in the wine. Do you perceive any sugar? Is it sweet at all? The tip of your tongue is usually where you're going to perceive sugar. This is a dry wine. It's fermented to dry. There is no residual sugar. Okay, now let's talk about tannins. What are tannins? Tannins are that stuff in wine that dry out your tongue. So your tongue is going to be super dry afterwards. Tannins come from the skins and the seeds, typically, in the fermenting process and the maceration process. So winemakers will leave the wine on the skins and stems primarily the skins to extract color. Sometimes they leave it on the stems as well, and that's just dependent on the winemaker and what their process is like. But for me, this wine, it dries out my mouth a little bit. So there's some tannins there, although these are pretty smooth and well-rounded. This is a 2010, as I mentioned, so it's had some time to age. And as time goes on, wines lose the tannic effect and they become silkier and smoother, which is why some people really love aged wine. One of the reasons why. Okay, we're also now going to talk about acidity. So acidity, swirl it around again. Woo, this has got some acid in it. Right here and right here, I can feel it. I'd say this is medium plus, maybe high acidity. There's definitely a lot of acidity here. And again, I can tell that because the sides of my mouth, you get that kind of puckering sensation there. So that's acidity. And then finally, body. How full or light bodied is the wine? Body, I always say you got to think about milk, and from a light percentage, but from the lighter side of the spectrum, you have 1% milk. And then as you go up 2% all the way to whole and even sometimes cream. The higher you go on that spectrum, the more full bodied the milk is, and you got to compare that to wine. Think about that feeling you get when you drink a skim milk. That's a light-bodied feeling, right? So if it feels similar on your palate, very thin almost. People call it thin sometimes, or watery sometimes people say. That means it's light-bodied. So I think that's pretty much it. Of course, the most important thing is whether you like it or not. I'm not gonna try and be too snobby about all of this. If you like the wine, great. That's all that really matters. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this, and we'll put some more videos up, and we'll keep on explaining how to demystify the wine process. Looking forward to it.